Okay, so Logitech just released its least expensive 1080p webcam at just around $40, the Logitech BRIO 100 series. But let's find out if it's any good. Can it stand up to the Logitech C920 for just a little bit more money these days? Let's find out. Alright, so this is the Logitech BRIO 101 in this case. It's part of the BRIO 100 series. You know, what I want to do first is really show you what the camera looks like by default and what it sounds like. Then I want to go over some of the software and settings. I want to tweak the image while I'm doing all of that. Then I want to give you kind of my high-level thoughts in terms of the Logitech BRIO 101. Okay, so this is the default image and default sound from the Logitech BRIO 101. I'm about 3-ish feet away from the camera's lens, looking straight into the camera and talking straight at the microphone, which is firing at me, again, about 3 feet away. And I'm using a key light that is located right to my left here, and it's at about 5,000 kelvins, and the background, because it's blue, I think it's making my skin tones a bit more on the orangey side, and I think it's metering the entire frame. Let me know in the comments what you think of the default image, but don't go anywhere because I'm going to tweak the image and also try to tweak the sound to make it look and sound better. Alright, so that was the default image. Now, part of the story around this camera, and then a lot of questions I get asked for now, the 300, 500, and other series of BRIO cameras, is what does the 100, 101, or 103, those types of designations, what do they mean? Well, the 100 designates it as a retail product, meaning that the box is going to be a little bit more retail friendly, more colors, typically a shinier cardboard. Whereas the business packaging, it looks more like this. You can see it's kind of the normal brown box packaging and the internals of it. It has also recyclable materials in terms of how the camera is packed. But the main reason for that is that it's a bit more sustainable, environmentally friendly, and a lot less waste in terms of companies that are buying hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of these to equip their workforce. That's not the only difference, though, not just the packaging. So another difference that you'll see is that the software that supports the 100 series versus the 101s and the 103s and other ones is that the 100 series tend to work with Logitech G Hub. So in this case, Logitech G Hub does not recognize the Logitech BRIO 101, but the Logi Tune software, which I like a lot, actually does recognize the Logitech BRIO 101. It also recognizes I've got a 301 and a 501, so all of those are tuned via the Logitech Logi Tune software. I actually like that because the G Hub is a very powerful application, but because it's got so many different products it's supporting, it supports the RGB lighting, for example, for keyboards and for mice and for their lights and also their webcams. It can get fairly heavy and do a lot of things that you don't necessarily need from an IT perspective if you're administering devices, for example, using tools like Intune or Configuration Manager for Microsoft. So that means that things like Logi Tune are going to be a little bit better equipped in terms of being lighter weight and easier to deploy, but still have the controls that you need to be able to set your camera settings and persist those camera settings after reboots. So that's kind of the software story. So you're going to use that software in order to tune the settings for the image. And for audio, one thing you can do is use tools like OBS, or you can also use Voicemeeter, for example, to tweak the audio. So now that you've seen the default image and heard the default sound, let me show you what a slightly tweaked image looks like. Maybe I can get rid of some of the orange tones on my skin tones. Alright, so now you're seeing and you're also hearing the Logitech BRIO with a little bit of tweaking and tuning to the image and the audio. I only use the Logi Tune app to do the image adjustments because that's probably the app that you're normally going to use for things like Microsoft Teams or Zoom, for example, or if you're streaming. You might use that plus OBS, but OBS is a little bit more of an advanced scenario, I think. Just for the image, what I tweaked was, by default, it had things like auto white balance turned on and low light compensation. I disabled both of those. The auto white balance I've set to 3863. Normally all of the default settings for brightness, contrast, saturation, and sharpness are at 128. And so I took the brightness down to 125, so just a little tiny bit. The contrast, I moved it up 2 points to 130. Saturation, I moved it down 10 points to 118. And sharpness, just to try to get rid of some of the noise behind me in the low light kind of situation there, I moved that down to 89 just to see if that would help. And then from the audio perspective, what I've done is I've kind of scooped out the mids a little bit. So I've turned the mids down to minus 3.1 dB on the 3-band EQ for using OBS sound filters. And I've also increased the bass tones up by about, 8.7 dB to give it a little bit more bass, because again, I'm so far away from the microphone. And I kept the top and the highs more or less where they were by default at 0.1 dB, just to see what that would sound like. It's still going to be a bit echoey, I think, because I am 3-ish feet away from the microphone and the lens. But this will give you an idea of what you can do with kind of default audio with the framing that I have here in this case, which is more or less shoulder up with the Logitech BRIO 101. All right, so let's go through some of the specs of the Logitech BRIO 100 series, which is going to be true if you have the 100 or the 101. So in terms of height, it's 1¼ inches tall, basically about 32 millimeters tall. Width, it's about 2.9 inches wide or 73 millimeters wide. It is pretty much on the small side. Depth is 2.6 inches or 66, almost 67 millimeters, and it doesn't weigh a lot. It's about 2.65 ounces or 75 grams. So one thing to point out as I look at the profile of the camera, you can see that the lens, which is about where I've got my finger, is lower than where the mounting point is. And the reason why people do this, and I see a lot of complaints on thinner bezel monitors because it will cover up sometimes a little bit of the monitor. But the idea here is that the lens of the webcam is as close as possible to your screen, so that when you're on things like Teams or Zoom, and assuming you've got the gallery on top, you'll have better eye contact with people while you're looking at your screen, as opposed to if you're looking down and talking to people, it kind of looks like this. But if you're kind of close up to the top of your monitor and looking at it, and maybe you just glance down a bit at the screen, you're not quite as kind of disconnected from others in terms of eye contact. So that's why they do that. So we already went over the different resolutions and frame rates in OBS. The other thing to be aware of is that it has this privacy shutter, and I tested that in OBS, so you can use this physical privacy shutter in order to cover up the lens so you can make sure that nothing is recording you. There's a microphone that you don't want to block in the middle, so you want to make sure you swing it all the way to the other side. And now you're in a film ready state, and there's an LED status light that will let you know if the camera is running. One thing to note here is that the camera itself has a USB-A input, which for a lot of people will be good news if they've got USB-A devices on their machines now. In terms of the field of view, it's pretty tight. So it's 58 degrees, which I'd say most cameras are around 70, 68 to 72, I would say is probably around the average range. Some of the wider angle ones like the BRIO 4K are a 90-degree field of view. That's part of the reason why I needed to have this camera about 3 feet away from my mouth, which also is why the audio was a lot more echoey than, say, a 90-degree field of view camera where I can move it up closer to me, but still look more or less the same size and have the same framing. So my overall thoughts on the camera, for $40, I think it's a great value. I think it's a solid camera. The white balance is a little weird because I'm wearing a black shirt and have a blue background. It does go a bit orangey, Oompa Loompa-ish on the skin tones, and it's metering across the whole frame, which is why it was kind of giving me those skin tones. As I raised my arms up like this, it would then change the auto white balance to something a bit more natural, but you know, the algorithm, the kind of settings or the auto tuning of the camera isn't quite right. But once it's tuned in, I think it looks pretty good again for that price point. And it sounds pretty good too from a microphone perspective. And I've tried, and you can see the video on the screen, I'll link to it, where I've had some really terrible webcam mics that I was able to save through Adobe Podcast, but this one actually is pretty solid in terms of image and sound quality. Weaknesses, I would say there is some background noise that you'll notice. It might not come through on the YouTube recording because the YouTube compression algorithm will probably smooth out some of the background noise. The other thing I would say is the focus, the sharpness of it. It's not tack sharp even for a 1080p camera, but it's pretty solid, and for $40 you can't really complain. I like the privacy shutter. I like the kind of Logi Tune app in general. And after image tweaks, I think it looks pretty good. And for a lot of cases, the image that's going through Microsoft Teams or Zoom is going to get compressed a bit. It might even be downscaled to 720p. And, you know, it'll be a lot more solid typically than your, bezel cameras say on your laptop in a lot of cases. And it will be an improvement to that. So those are my thoughts on the Logitech BRIO 100 series. I would recommend it at $40. I probably wouldn't pay anything more than that for the BRIO 101 or the 100 series, but it's a solid camera with solid image and solid audio. If you dial in the image a little bit, you'll be happy with that camera. So if this review was of value to you, be sure to hit the like button and check out this video where I'm going to go through all the different Logitech cameras as of 2023 so you can see how they all compare, just so you can kind of benchmark it against this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.